Hello and welcome to Ear Seduction. I'm your host, Paul Schilling. I'm going to be trying something new today because I'm now traveling through Europe. I've been here for about 10 days and I've gone through London and now I'm in Amsterdam. After my week in Amsterdam, I'll be going to Brussels and then to Paris. Finally, I'll take the train back to London and then fly back home to Denver. Now, doing a video journal of my travels is new to me, so this is very rough, and I apologize for that. I've become interested in urbanism now for the past 2 or 3 years, and it really started when I was bored during COVID, and I was looking for new content, and I found a few content creators. One was Not Just Bikes, the other was City Nerd, RM Transit. There were a few content creators that stood out. RM Transit, I really like how he sort of gives you the nuts and bolts of a working metro system. So he goes over not so much city design as he goes over transit design. But as part of any good city, transit is a major factor. City Nerd talks a little bit about city design, but it's more personal. He gives more his impressions of the cities that he's in, and he brings some hard numbers to you, which I like. So he does breakdowns, and I also like his personality. He's very funny. If you're into men, he's very attractive, and while he's awkward, and he knows it. He's very sarcastic and fun to watch and listen to, and his jokes are really quite funny. The other was Not Just Bikes, and he was probably the most sort of universally available. He offered the most information. So if you like a well narrated, it's voiceover work over video, you'll like Not Just Bikes because you get to see the cities that he's talking about, but then you also get to see you get to hear him explain things to you. And he really brings to the forefront city design and good spaces. And he helps you understand the difference between usable, functional spaces and bad spaces. Spaces that are not meant for you, they're meant for cars or they're meant for something else. And so it's important if you're interested in urbanism, it's important to try and orient yourself, and those are 3 really good content creators to get involved and to start watching. But first off, why should you care about urbanism? Well, you live in a community, and that community, even though it may be called rural or suburban, is urban. It has an urban quality to it, meaning that you will be transporting yourself in some way. You will have to commute in some way from A to B, and that you might have to go from your house to the barn. You might have to go from where you live to where you work. You might have to go out and get groceries and so on. And so the options available to you to get from A to B has a lot to do with the design of the city that you're in, the environment that you're in. And that's what urbanism is all about. It's about designing environments that are useful for people, and specifically, generally at least, large groups of people where a lot of different activities are happening. So the most useful infrastructure is what urbanism is about. And it's the most useful for the most amount of people, or for the most kinds of uses. So urbanism isn't just about big metropolitan areas. Urbanism is about how humans use their surroundings and the infrastructure to make it easier to get from A to B, to get goods and services from A to B, and to just generally commute or travel. And that's within the city, like I said, or within your area. Now, just to be aware, I keep looking up, and that's because the city is right outside a window right here. And it's Amsterdam, so it's just people everywhere. and that's fantastic. But let's get back to the problem here. So after becoming educated in urbanism, I became very acutely aware of the pain points that I was experiencing. So during my day-to-day life in Denver, I have quite a bit of stress and discomfort and I get stressed out, as I was just saying, but I also have like trauma and post-trauma, and I'm not like one of these overly sensitive people that like, oh, I have trauma. What I'm talking about is typical post-trauma, typical fight or flight response trauma that everybody experiences just because they're living, just because that's how human beings react to their environment. So if you're driving down the street and somebody looks like they're going to pull out, but they don't, that causes a trigger response. That's a trauma to you. And it may be a very minute trauma, one that you're very used to, or maybe it's like been dulled down in your brain as to how traumatic that actually is, but it's still a trauma. And little by little, those traumas chip away at your mental health. And you may or may not need to go to a clinic or see a therapist or whatever, but your overall mental health and your level of exhaustion and your open-mindedness to new experiences and such have a lot to do with how much of that trauma you experience throughout the day. One explanation for why you're so exhausted and you're so sick of everything and you just can't hear another fucking thing is because you live in a poorly designed urban environment. One that's loud all the time. Now, there's a lot of science to demonstrate that loud noises takes a mental toll and a physical toll on your body and can lead to things like depression, and it can lead to things like shutting down. And if you follow urbanist content, if you understand urbanism, then you know that driving everywhere, having cars be the main mode, and in the United States it's the only method of transportation, that was a misstep. Cars are bad for you. The noise is bad for you. The pollution's bad for you. The amount of space that cars take up is bad for you. Think of how many more houses we could build if we didn't have parking lots. Take a look at a parking lot map of a typical downtown area. See how much real estate is spent just parking cars. Take a look outside your window. You probably see, I'm in Amsterdam and I see a row of cars right in front of my window. Think of how much more could be in that space than cars. And then think about how poorly those cars are constructed for just one person to get to one place just once. Once a day, once a week, once a month. Cars are built to carry 5, 6 people and plus luggage. Do you really need 5 or 6 people worth of space and all that and luggage just to go down and get some oranges? The answer is no. And after I became educated in urbanism, I started to realize just how poor my quality of life was in the urban environment in which I live. And the major reason why was cars and car infrastructure. And if you live in the United States, if you understand the way people think in the United States, they're 50 years, maybe 100 years behind Europe. Once you realize that your quality of life is terrible, and most of the reason why is because the city you live in is built for cars and not for people, and the people that run the city don't care about people. And when I say the people that run it, I'm not talking about your local CDOT person or your local government person that does clearly care about you and cares about the community and is doing the best that they can. I'm talking about the people that really run the city. The billionaires, the millionaires, the high-level governments, the mayors, the governors, the people that actually have control over where the money goes. They're not interested in getting that money to you and to infrastructure that benefits you. They're interested in building infrastructure that benefits major car companies, big billionaire corporations, or people. In the United States, corporations are people. So those billionaires have so much pull that even little minute upgrades are generally squashed before they even get started, because it's against the interests of the corporations. It's against the interests of the billionaires. And your everyday average citizen becomes aligned with corporations and billionaires because they have no other options. If you live in Denver, your only option is to drive. Your only worry is where are you going to park? If people want to take away your parking spots, even in good urbanism, taking away parking is absolutely one of the answers. It's an answer, though, that requires a 2, maybe 3 or 4 prong approach. You have to add public transportation. You have to add bike lanes and walking. But if you don't have options, if you don't have the ability to get from A to B without using your car, then of course you're aligned with Ford and Chevy and Toyota and the other companies that have so much power in the United States government and how things are run and how things are built. Well, that's the reason why I came to Europe, because I'm sick of living in the United States. I'm sick of living in a place that doesn't care about its citizens, except for the ones that have an LLC or a corporation after their name. When you think about it, to go get a bag of oranges in the United States, you need to have a vehicle, which has to have up-to-date tires and good mechanics. You have to maintain that vehicle, which is very expensive. You have to license it. You have to license yourself. You have to get insurance. You have to insure yourself. You have to insure for people that don't get insurance or that aren't from this country or whatever. You have to do all this work, all this paperwork. All of it. You have to take a test. You have to take tests every 10 years or whatever it is. All just because you want to go get a bag of oranges. And because the way the city's designed, you have no other option but to drive. I live in a neighborhood very specifically chosen because of its proximity to the light rail and to halfway decent busing, although the busing sucks no matter what you do in Denver, except for on like 2 different routes. There's the Broadway and Colfax, and then that's it. And the light rail sucks too. But everything in my neighborhood was chosen because of proximity. So my gym is less than a mile away. My supermarket's less than a mile away. The library's less than a mile away. All the amenities that I use in the city is roughly less than a mile away. There's a hardware store less than a mile away. There's like a big box Target type place less than a mile away. Everything I need is less than a mile away. It's incredibly convenient by American standards, but that's by American standards. In other countries, things are within walking distance, so less than half a mile or quarter mile away. All those things. And we're going to go over that as we discuss this further. But let's get into it actually. Let's get into some of my notes. So here is an account of exactly how things went for me. And as you'll find, the hardest part was just getting out of Denver. And I had problems as soon as I stepped out the door. First off, trying to navigate the Denver metro system is a fucking nightmare. And if you look at my train station, so I decided to take the train, which by the way, ended up being a terrible idea because the card reader wouldn't work. And I missed the train. And there wasn't another train for 45 minutes. And so I missed my opportunity to go to the airport in time. And so I had to call an Uber, which I hate doing. I hate those companies. All of those tech companies that are like shared whatever is just crap. I used to work for one and it was a nightmare. But when you look at the train station, first off, it's impossible to find. There's no signage and it's tucked away off of a busy street with nothing around it that you would ever want to go to. None of the things that you see when you get off the train are things that you want to do. Things that there's nothing that you need there. There's no pharmacy, there's no grocery store, there's no anything. There's weird government buildings which look sort of like institutional, and then there's a senior citizens living center, which doesn't do me much good. I don't have anybody that I know that lives there. It was a nightmare. Getting to the train was a nightmare. You can't cross the street, there's no crosswalk, and the cars are flying 45, 50 miles an hour, and it's 5 or 6 lanes wide. So it's just huge. It's definitely for cars, and it's not for you. And so just getting to my train station is miserable. But then once you get to the train station, it's like they built it on top of a mountain. It's like an English castle. I'm waiting for there to be a moat with alligators because it's this huge wall. It's like 2 or 3 stories tall. And on one side, there's this unnavigable, steep, horrible staircase. And on the other, there's the longest, most difficult ramp that you could ever imagine. That I think it goes up, it has 2 switchbacks, but it might just be 1 full switchback. But it's very, very far, very long, and very, very, it's shallow, but it's tedious. It must be horrible if you're in a wheelchair or you have special needs of any kind to get to this train station. Oh, and by the way, once the train rolls up, you have to go up another set of steps, which turned out to be a major problem when I did have somebody I was with a couple years back that did have disabilities. He went one way, his seeing eye dog went the other way on the other side of the rail, and they got stuck. So he literally got stuck trying to get on the train. Just a nightmare. Well, I missed my train. So I had the Lyft take me to Union Station, which is essentially Grand Central Station in Denver. And it could not be more poorly designed. Now, the one thing that's nice, it was revamped, so it's pretty looking, but you walk into the train station and you would have no idea that you're in a train station. There's no turnstiles, there's no signage, there's no ticker that tells you when the next train's coming, whether it's on time or not. There's no signage that says this way to trains. There's no any indication that you should move through the building to the back doors where you can then walk out into the platforms. And then once you get to the platforms, there's no signage to tell you what train you're looking at. Is this the A train to the airport? Is it, whatever, the blue line or the red line or whatever? Which train, where are the trains? Which one am I looking at? You have no idea. Oh, and by the way, the card reader doesn't work. So the card reader to get onto the train, which I was taking the A train, which goes to the airport, didn't work. I notified 3 different people that worked there. They were very nice. I don't want to say that they were bad people, but they had no idea what was happening. They couldn't fix anything. They didn't have any power to do anything. They were almost completely useless, other than that they were very friendly and nice and smiling a lot, and I liked them very much. But other than that, they could not help me. So they told me, just get on the train. Don't worry about paying, just get on the train. So then I got on the train, but then somebody asked me for my ticket. And I said, well, they told me, and I had to explain the whole thing. So I was put into a potentially bad situation. You can be prosecuted for being on a train, good Lord, without paying for it. Just, by the way, from time to time, I may pause because this is true. Amsterdam is absolutely chock full of beautiful people. So I was having trouble at the train station. Okay, fast forward. Now I'm on the train, I'm at the airport. Because of how things worked out, I actually got to the airport too early. But I was like, fuck it, I just need to go to the airport. There's nothing really to do at the train station anyway. There's not like shops around there that are worth going to. Although there are some shops, it's not like a European downtown or even a New York downtown. In Denver, there's just not that much downtown that's worth going to or doing. And by the way, even if there was, you can't get there. There's no public transportation downtown in Denver. There's a busing system and there's one light rail line, but it is almost completely useless. When you get to DIA is actually quite nice. I know a lot of people that are watching this, especially if you're an urbanist, you might not like airports, and the whole process of boarding and deboarding and everything is way different than riding trains. Trains are far superior. They're much easier. They're much simpler. They're cheaper. They're everything you want them to be. But I actually enjoy flying. It's not my favorite mode of travel, but I like traveling, and flying is traveling. So I enjoy flying, and Denver Airport is actually quite nice. The Denver International Airport has plenty of shopping if you like shopping. It has plenty of eating. If you like eating, that's what I like doing. And it's clean, it's well kept. The people there are very useful and helpful, and the airport itself is quite intuitive, and it's an easy space to navigate. Interesting side note, I'm a single person, and so I often look at people as potential dates, even though I think that's very old-fashioned. I don't think people date that way anymore. But I did see a stewardess on the plane who I was like, wow, I would love to ask her out. Now, I didn't, and I generally don't. I generally don't ask women out anymore because I don't think that it's appropriate. I'm 45. When you get to your 40s, it's very clear to women that you're not useful anymore. They don't look at you like you have anything to offer at all. In fact, you are almost going to be invisible, probably from now until the day you die. So, of course, she didn't notice me. So, Heathrow. I landed in Heathrow, and boy, was that different. It was very easy. I found my train almost right away. However, I did get on the wrong train. I got on the Piccadilly instead of the Elizabeth, and I had planned my trip for the Elizabeth, but guess what? Because it's London, that wasn't a big problem. The Piccadilly takes you in a different way. It's a different route, but it was very easy for me to step off the train, and I just stepped across the platform to a different train, got on that train, and got on my merry way. I got back on track, in other words. Now, that district line arrived exactly 3 minutes after the Piccadilly dropped me off. So it was really sensational. Now, they're really nice walk-through trains. The Piccadilly wasn't that great, but the district line was a really nice walk-through train. Very airy and open, very comfortable, not very full, but definitely a lot of blue-collar folk on the train. It was nice to see the heart and soul of London. And it was 10 cars long. It was a full-on train, which is great because you don't see trains like that in Denver. It took me to Blackfriars, which is my stop where I transferred to the Thames Link, or Thames Link. Now, I had to wait 10 minutes for the Thames Link, which took me down south, and that took me to Peckham Rye. This really couldn't have been a better travel experience. And of course, it's a train. So it's calming, it's relaxing, you can read. The only time when the train isn't calming and relaxing is when you're in the underground, and that's because it's loud and it's a little bit polluted. So definitely, if you're going to be traveling by train, there's 2 things I recommend you take with you. 3 things really. Take eye drops so that you can clean out your eyes because it is going to be a little bit grimy, especially in the underground. Same with the New York subway. Take earplugs. The other thing I would bring is something to clean, like a towel. I carry like a microfiber towel with me. You can clean off your glasses with it, you can blow your nose with it, you can do whatever you want with it. They're really easy to clean, they dry out really quickly because it's polyester. So it's just super useful. Now, I don't blow my nose with it generally because there's a bathroom somewhere where I can blow my nose. But you can do a lot with it, is what I'm saying. And they're very easy to clean, and they dry very easily. Now, I generally use it to clean my glasses, and definitely that's something you'll need to do if you have glasses. If you don't have glasses, you still want a towel to clean yourself. You get kind of grimy. And so it's very nice to be able to wipe yourself off. I stayed in Peckham, which is South London. I highly recommend South London to folks that are looking to go to London. Everybody I talked to said it was a rough neighborhood. I picked it because it's a blue-collar working neighborhood in London, and I wanted to get an experience of where I might live, not because I would necessarily live in a blue-collar neighborhood, but I like blue-collar neighborhoods. I like I don't want to say salt of the earth. I feel like that's become sort of a pejorative. I like people that have real worries in their lives. If your life is too posh and you're too disconnected from reality, I don't generally get along with folks like that, unless they're just like artist types and they just like to, they're so disconnected that they talk in these weird, it's almost like they have their own language, like philosophers and shit. I like people like that because it's just fun to talk to weird people. But generally speaking, I like, meat and potatoes kind of people that I can sit and talk to about real problems, about the real world. And so I've picked Peckham. My station was called Peckham Rye, and it's a really fun little neighborhood. It reminded me a little bit of Queens, New York. If you've been to Queens, everything is on that same scale. It's not like Manhattan where everything's gigantic. The streets aren't really wide and such. Queens is a much smaller, safer, more navigable place with smaller buildings that are more people-sized. And it reminded me of that. Although I will say the whole city of London is set up a lot more like Queens. It's much smaller. It's much more compact. There are some neighborhoods there, like Piccadilly Circus was really big and grandiose. And there's some other areas that are like that, but generally speaking, London, while the square mileage is, I think, almost triple that of New York, and it's definitely double, but I think it's almost triple, the actual spaces that you're in are much smaller, which is very, very nice. Now, if there's one word to describe London, it's wet. It rained, I think, every single day I was in London. I was there for 8 days. I didn't see any patches of blue sky for the first 3 days. It took 3 full days for there just to be a little opening in the clouds where I could see the sky. And I don't think I saw the sun 3 times, and never for more than a couple of hours. One day, I think it came out for like 4 hours, and it was actually, you could feel warmth. There was one day where I was out and about, there's a stop called Canada Water. I was out there at a place called Decathlon, and it was the only sporting good place I could find that had what I was looking for and reasonable prices, and it was very reasonable, by the way. Top notch. But the sun was out that day. It was still raining, of course, but the sun was out that day and you could feel warmth. That was very nice. But that only happened once. Now let's get back to Peckham real quick. So I'm in Peckham, and my first impression getting off the train there was that it was a bit dirty. It was a bit dirty, a little bit seedy. I stopped at a place right off the train station because at train stations in normal cities that give a shit about people, when you get off the train, there's shit to do. There's coffee shops and newsstands and bars and restaurants and grocery stores and hardware stores and things that you need because you're right there. You're at the train. People understand how to design cities in other countries. And London is a pretty well-designed city, I must say. I did enjoy London quite a bit. But anyway, I stopped in at the bar there. I got a pint of beer and I got a burger because I was famished. And I talked to the nice lady that worked there. And she told me that Peckham is safe. She felt comfortable walking around at night, but it wasn't like some other neighborhoods safe. So it was a safe place to be. It just wasn't as safe as some other neighborhoods. And it was definitely on the up and coming. A lot of people told me that Peckham is up and coming. They'd say gentrification. I'm not exactly sure what gentrification means. In the United States, it means less black people. It's a racist term generally, but they say gentrification, and that's what I hear when they say that. Now, I don't think things need to be gentrified. I think the city needs to invest in the communities that live there. So when somebody talks about a city, a borough like Peckham on the rise, what I want to hear is that the city is investing in transportation and infrastructure and schools for the people that live in that part of the city, and jobs and education and so on. I don't want to hear gentrification, because that just means that nobody that lives there now will be able to afford to live there in 10 years or whatever. And that just means less of the people that are there. The community that made that Peckham what it is are going to be moved out, and they don't have to be outpriced. They need to be uplifted, and that's what I would like to see. So gentrification with an emphasis on keeping the people that live there and just rising all boats, educating them so that they can compete with the other folks that are moving in, bringing jobs and money and infrastructure to that neighborhood. That's what I would like to see. but I'm progressive, so what do I know? Now, the people at the bar told me that Peckham isn't really unsafe. It's just busy. It's just a busy place, and there are, in fact, quite a few ways for you to essentially get run over by a car, or you could get run over like figuratively. Somebody might take your wallet, or they might take your phone out of your hand. People were warning me, to be a little bit aware of where you are and what you're doing. Now, I didn't spend that much time out in London late because, interesting fact about London, pretty much everything closes at 10 or 11 o'clock at night, unless you're in like Piccadilly Circus or the theater district. All the bars in my neighborhood, all the pubs, all the restaurants, everything closed at the very latest midnight. It was not the 24-hour city that I thought it was going to be. And by the way, nothing opens early either. The places that you would expect to be open at 5 or 6 in the morning, like gyms or coffee shops or whatever, did not open at all. They were open at the very earliest at 8. Most places opened between 9 and 10, with 10 being more common than 9. And lots of places didn't open until noon. And then most restaurants and stuff like that, except for pubs generally did open for lunch, but they might close between like 2 and 5 or 3 and 6. But most restaurants and stuff didn't even open until 5 or 6. So I'm the kind of person that just likes to bounce around a city and pop into a place whenever I see a place. So if I see an Indian place, I think, well, I could eat Indian right now. I could almost eat anything all the time. So I'll go there. And I was turned away probably a dozen times because nothing was open. Nobody wanted to serve me. They might be open for delivery, but probably not. So that was actually kind of a put off. I was not as happy about that. In my experiences in New York City, you walk into a place, you get food. It doesn't matter what time of day. And largely, now that I'm in Amsterdam, I'm having a similar experience, but we'll get to that. As far as the way that Peckham's designed as an urbanist, it's very, very convenient. The busing is fantastic, and there are buses everywhere, going everywhere. Double-decker red buses, they run all the time, every 3 minutes, every 7 minutes sometimes, but all the time. I never had to wait more than 10 minutes for a bus, and most of the time it was 3 to 5. $1.75 for as far as you want to go, maximum $5.35 each day. That's £5.35. Very useful, very easy, and quick note, if you're using a VPN, don't turn it on while you're on LTE. When you're on high speed and you're in the city, when you're using your data, don't use your VPN because mine was set to the United States, but even if it's set to London, don't use it because it can confuse the service that you're riding. One last thing on price. So eating out is, I thought, quite reasonable. I went to Soho, which is a very upscale neighborhood, and I found an Austin barbecue joint. And apparently it's run by a guy from Austin, Texas, and he does barbecue there. I did not eat because it wasn't open, because nothing's fucking open. But I did look at his menu through the window, and it looked very similar to prices in Austin. I don't think he's charging much more than what he was charging in Austin. And it looked exactly similar to what I would pay for barbecue in Denver. So the prices for food are not extravagant. And by the way, this is in Soho. This is in really the heart of downtown London. So you're in one of the most upper class neighborhoods in the whole city. And by the way, you're right next to everything. Everybody wants to, the National Museum and the National Gallery, and the British Museum and all of it. It's all right there. And they had plenty of offerings at 25. So the food in London is world class for the most part, as long as it's not British food. And it's cheap. Now, I didn't have anything out that was as good as anything I had in Queens. I still think so far, Queens, if your retirement strategy is to eat your way to death, which that's mine, and I'm gonna get the telomere pill to extend my life so I can eat my way till I'm 150, right to the grave. But if your goal is to eat yourself to death, it's so far, in my opinion, it's still Queens. They still have the best food. Let's talk about the tunnel a little bit. So the London Underground is probably the most famous, and if you want extensive information on the London Underground, RM Transit is your go-to source. So first off, it's not very well ventilated. And when you go underground, you know you're underground, and the air quality is poor. So if you're going to be in the underground a lot, I was not in the underground a lot. I was mostly in the overground. But if you're going to be in the underground, bring a mask. And I'm not talking about a fucking paper, a crappy blue mask. I'm talking about a HEPA filter mask, which is, the kind of mask that painters wear. A dust mask. So like a P or N, 90, 95, 100, with a little valve in the front so that you don't fog up your glasses. But get yourself a mask. You will be happy you did. And definitely you want to wear earplugs. You'll be very happy you did that. So the internet's a little bit spotty in the underground. And while it's not, there is internet down there and you can get by because there's internet at all the stations, but not necessarily in the tube. I highly recommend you bring something to read or some other way to spend your time other than looking at your phone. Now, if obviously you could just look at people watching is viable because you probably don't want to bring something if you don't have to, right? You don't want to carry anything that you don't absolutely need. But if you're going to be in the underground a lot, if you're going to be traveling by train a lot, or if you have a long way to go, I would bring a book or a Kindle or something, or I would download something to my phone that I can read. Because you may or may not have the kind of service you're looking for. So real quick, on my 5th day, I was in Elephant and Castle and I popped into a pub. I was just walking home from there, which is quite a ways to Peckham. So I just popped into a pub somewhere along the way and I met my first Nazi. That was interesting. It only took 5 days. And he was talking about being a member of and voting for the British Nationalist Party, which is the farthest of the far right in Britain. And he openly said, this is the party that's affiliated and associated with Nazism. And I thought, oh, good, because that is as far from me politically as one can get. And just to be clear, modern day Nazism, fascism is not just all about the 40s and what happened then and executing Jews and so on. It's now, fascism has become much more, it's like graduated. Neo-Nazism encompasses so much more than fascism from the 30s and 40s. And so it not only is it nuanced, and not in a good way. Usually the word nuanced means, oh, you have there's a nuanced bouquet coming from this wine that I got from my ferry, which is probably piss wine, but anyway, I smell apricot and is that lily? No, what I mean is that they hate people in so many different ways, and they have so many different avenues places that they draw from. So listen to this. This is almost hard. So he was pro-farmer. He said he grew up in a farming community. He's raised by farmers. He's obviously not a farmer. He's a beer slinger at a pub in London, working right alongside women and black people and people from other countries and other stuff, right? So he's definitely London, but he is very pro-farming. And he's so pro-farming that he's against supermarkets. He thought that Britain was at its best before the advent of the supermarket. Like, is that what the fuck kind of person? What is going on in the world where a goddamn Nazi can sit there and tell me that we need to revert back to the time before the supermarket? Like, one of the greatest inventions of all time, a place where you can go to get basically any kind of food that exists in a very comfortable environment. It's very fresh. We have a whole industry that is, I'm not going to say the word miracle, but it is a complete and total triumph of modern day science and engineering, that it's even possible to have blueberries from Argentina in a British supermarket. And this podunk, poorly toothed, rotting toothed fucking neo-Nazi wants to revert back to a time when his British grandpa could go, all right then, hey, what you want? You want some carrots? Oi, that sounds good to me. You got any potatoes in there? Like a kind of English that you can't even understand. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to be overly cruel to people. I empathize with people that farm and that make a living in sort of ancient ways. I understand wanting to preserve some of that, but come on. Are we really expected to revert back to pre-supermarket? I guess what would it be, like farmers markets? Like you would just walk, there'd be a guy with a cart full of potatoes or whatever from his farm, and that's where you get your potatoes? From Steve or whatever, Ian, right? I mean, he's British, so he's Nigel. Hey, Nigel, you got any potatoes in there? And you don't even know what he just said because you're like, what? But, I mean, it was alarming how backwards he wanted to make Britain. And when I asked him where the pain was coming from, he immediately said immigration, and specifically Polish immigration, that they were living off of the government and that they wouldn't work and that they would take the money that they made from the government and they would send it back to Poland, and that's where they would build, and I'm quoting here, mansions. He said that they would build mansions with British money in Poland and then go and retire in their mansion, their Polish mansion or whatever, British funded Polish mansion, and happily live the rest of their lives there. That's what he thought was happening. That's a narrative that the British nationalists are peddling, that he's absorbing and then telling me, as if I'm supposed to believe him, first of all. I asked him if he had any evidence of this. He had none. I said, what are the percentages? He didn't know. I said, is this like rife? Is it everywhere? Is it all the time? Couldn't say. He said it was much more prolific than I might think, but that just is a stupid way of saying I don't know. So it was just insane to me. If there is a problem of immigration, which I'm not convinced that there is, like in a sweeping generalized way, like immigration bad, I'm not convinced. But if there is a problem with immigration, it certainly isn't that they're just Polish people. And this narrative sounds very fishy and suspicious. Now, I don't know all the politics in Britain, but it seems unlikely to me that Poles are moving to Britain and building mansions back in Poland with the money that they make, because there's so much money in Britain for the Polish people. I mean, most people in Britain don't make that much money. It's like everywhere else that's been commercialized and corporatized and corporatized, whatever. in modern Western society, there isn't that much money for your average person. There's certainly, it doesn't matter how much fucking money you make, there's not enough money to live your life in London and build a mansion in Poland. I mean, it does matter how much money you make, but like a Polish immigrant, let's say a Polish immigrant does move to London and makes enough money to build a mansion in Poland. That's probably a pretty fucking productive member of society. I want to meet that guy and find out what he's doing and see if there's something he needs help with, because he's probably running a wildly successful business that offers a wonderful service to people that live in London, including this dipshit neo-Nazi. So anyway, now in the United States, it's gone so far off the rails that you get QAnon and fucking lizard people and Alex Jones, that fluoride makes people gay kind of shit. Like, it's so far off that you hear Marjorie Taylor Greene talking about Jewish space lasers starting forest fires so that they can clear ground for a Jewish, high-speed rail infrastructure. Like, that's how fucking crazy it is in the United States. That's why I'm in Britain and Europe, to get the fuck out of the United States and see if there's an alternative that makes sense for me. But you go to Britain and they're talking about farming, so it's like, okay, at least it's not Alex Jones. But how far off are they? Well, apparently the Poles are coming here and just being a plumber or whatever he is. I don't know, whatever Polish people do in Britain, just being a whatever, just a street sweeper or a plumber. He's sending back money to Poland, where he's building a castle for his wife or what, I don't know, somebody, and then he's gonna go there and live, and he's gonna have servants from Serbia or something. I don't know what the fuck, you know what I mean? I don't know what the fuck he's talking about, but the bullshit gets pretty deep pretty quick. Now, I told him I was the most progressive person I know, which is probably a stupid thing to say, but it feels like that. That's another reason why I'm moving out of the United States, is because even the progressives in the United States are pretty right. They're pretty right-leaning. There's a lot of NIMBYism. There's a lot of, well, I voted for this progressive, but I don't want to implement their policies. Or, there's a lot of this sort of Disney version of diversity where they want to see it in the movies, but they don't want it to really mean anything. I know a lot of people that live in, 99% white neighborhoods, and they talk about diversity as if they're not racist, but they're not actually interested in other races. They're not actually interested in other cultures. And so I don't know. Even the most progressive person I know in the United States is not progressive in my estimation. So another little tidbit of why I'm trying to leave. Now, of course, the neo-Nazi expressed sympathy for Trump and the Trump movement, of course. And he said stuff like, well, wasn't he good for the economy? No, he wasn't. Economics is very complicated, and a blunt strategy like Trump's to just make the rich richer, not nuanced enough to actually benefit the economy. Real quick, I mentioned to this fellow that all fascist movements in the past started by appealing to the working class. They all start that way. That's who they're trying to get. They need boots on the ground, and that's who their boots on the ground are. They then become funded by corporations and corporate interest before they take a hard right turn into taking away everyone's rights. All of these movements started with an appeal to people that have been left behind, or perhaps made to feel stupid, or are in some way obsolete in their training or understanding of the world. And it's about a rejuvenation of that time. We're going to get back to that time when farmers, when there wasn't a supermarket or whatever. But then that energy and that fervor turns into, well, who's the problem? And in the case of this gentleman, it was Polish people, apparently. So he has an enemy, and then it's about repressing, suppressing, and ultimately in Europe, it's about exterminating that enemy in order to benefit yourself. And it really, really, really doesn't have to be that way. It really doesn't. When I mentioned that to him, he had no response. When I said all fascist movements started by appealing to folks like yourself and then ended up being really horrible in a multitude of different ways, he just looked at me like, yeah, well, what are you going to do? Oh, Brexit. So interesting aspect of British culture now that Brexit's happened. You can't get a lot of things in Britain that you used to be able to get. So I had a hell of a time finding things. And I came here with almost nothing. So that was the idea. And I knew I was going to be shopping a lot, and I knew I was going to be looking, for clothes and for shoes and underwear. I still haven't found a decent pair of underwear that I wanted to get at a decent price. Although I'm going to go shopping tomorrow to see if I can find something. But you can't find hydrogen peroxide in London. It doesn't exist. That's because of Brexit. You can't find, I just found a nose hair trimmer today. I mean, bad news. I have a very available inner nose. It's one of my worst traits of my whole face, next to the rest of my face. But yeah, I need a nose hair trimmer. It's part of my daily routine. It's part of how I keep this in business, but I also need an ear trimmer. I'm getting old, and so hair is growing in places. I've always had nose hair, but ear hair is new. And I couldn't find one. Didn't have them. People said, oh, we usually carry them, but we don't have them in. Try next week. This is Brexit. This is goods and services that should be and normally would be, pre-Brexit in Britain and readily available are not available. And it makes it very difficult on the population to get, to have business as usual, to carry on with their lives. But Brexit really is hurting people. Anytime that you restrict trade, you generally hurt the population, not only the population in your country, but the population that you're trading with. So while I do think it's important to have things made on your, in your country, you should have food and things made in your country so that when things go to shit, you have a source of food, right? Obviously. But you should also trade, and you should also trade as much as you can, as often as you can. Trade is a very good thing. It's one of the great advancements of humanity. And self-sufficiency is important, but not at the expense of trade. Okay. So last but not least, we're going to wrap up Britain before moving on to Amsterdam and the Netherlands. In the United States, we have an organization called Strong Towns. And it's a pathetic, trying to be useful, humanist organization, progressive. Yes, I support them. I'm saying they're pathetic in a loving way, but it's pathetic because they really don't have a leg to stand on. They're not going to make much change. They can't because people don't care about society in the United States. They don't care about each other. And ultimately, that's another reason why I came to originally, Britain, but that's why I did this trip, because I'm looking for a place that actually cares about its people. And one of the ways that you can demonstrate as a government or as a society, as a community, that you care about yourself and other people is by having well-designed cities that are accessible by all different kinds of people. People that are in wheelchairs, people that are elderly, people that are gorgeous, people that are whatever, can get to and fro in your city easily, and they have lots and lots of options. Now, Strong Towns tries to implement strategies to do this in the United States, but you really shouldn't need a special organization just to make sure the government doesn't fuck you every chance they get. just so that the town that you live in is viable for the community, right? And the money in the United States is being pushed into so many different directions that's counterproductive to humanity, that it's really embarrassing that we have something called strong towns. Now, by the way, you should, if you live in the United States, even if you don't, you should support strong towns. You should donate to them. You should get involved with them. You should become organized with them. You should do everything you can to make your community the best that it can be, and to also make it viable. Now, I'm not convinced that that everything needs to be for money or for profit, but strong towns does make it easier for communities to function, because it does offer a financially viable strategy, unlike the strategy we have right now in the United States, which is to just make suburbs endlessly. If you're interested in that, it's Not Just Bikes is a great resource for understanding what I just said and why I said it, how suburbs don't work and how they don't work for the people that live in them or the people that don't live in them, and how they don't work for the community as a whole or the government or anything. All that information, you can go to Strong Towns, and you should. You can go to Not Just Bikes, and you should get that. That's on your list. But it's pretty sad, because when you go to some place like Britain, you actually do see, and London was a great example of it, it is a community that cares about itself. It cares about each other. They have national health care. They have lots of options. I mean, I walk out my front door and there's bike paths, there's walking paths, there's places to safely walk, although I was complaining earlier, and I stand to that. It wasn't terribly comfortable or safe right outside my front door because I was on like a busy street, but you could find places, there's neighborhood, there's biking and walking paths and all kinds of infrastructure for it. But it was very obviously much more people-centric, much more humane. It was more based on making successful communities for successful people. And there were bikes available to rent. Buses were buzzing by every 3 minutes to take me where I needed to go. They have the underground, they have the overground, they have all kinds of there's southern, southwestern, southeastern, northern, all these other different train services and companies that work in the overground to help get you where you want. There's Thameslink, there's all of it. It's very clear that the people of Britain, and specifically London and that area, want you to have access to everything that the city has to offer and that the country has to offer. And so that's really the bottom line. That's the punchline. Does your community care about itself and about the people that are in it? And that sounds redundant maybe, but I think there's a slight difference there. And if so, if they do, is that reflected in the infrastructure? Or perhaps better said, if it's not reflected in the infrastructure, how much can they really say they care? Does your city tell you that it loves you? Does it make things safe for you? Does it give you access, no matter who you are? Now, I know some of you are having a hard time, you're like, well, of course, I have a car and I drive on the street. But what if you don't have a car? What if you don't have legs? What if you don't have whatever? Is it good for you too? Some of you don't have the ability to think abstractly, so it's very difficult for you to put yourself in other people's position. But does your city reflect caring for humanity, not just you? Or just in general, does your city really show you in how it's built and its infrastructure that it cares about people? Or does it care about cars and corporations? You go to any major city, Denver's the best example I have because that's where I live, but you go to any major city and you go to a city center. I have a city center in Denver that I frequent, It's where my supermarket is. There's a liquor store there. There's like, how much does that city center and the design of that city center care about me and about my experience there, what it's like to be there as a human being? How much does it care if I walk out of the supermarket and I want to go to the sushi place, or if I walk out of the sandwich shop and I want to go to the liquor store? How much does it care? It doesn't show, the city center, the way it's built, it does not care if I have one leg or two legs or no legs. It doesn't care if I'm in a wheelchair or if I'm 90 years old or if I'm just tired and I'm fucking sick of walking because I have a hard job and a hard life and I've got something on my toe and it hurts. It doesn't care. And so far, at least in London, I am not getting that sense. I'm getting the sense that the city cares. It's doing its best to provide everything I need within walking distance and with a safe walking distance. Now, not everything is perfect. Peckham wasn't perfect. I almost got hit by a bus, at least the mirror. But the first day I arrived in Peckham, I was able to run all of my errands in 20 minutes, and I went to 5 different places. No, that can't be right. I went to 3 different places. 3 places, 20 minutes. That's a good deal. That's a good deal. That's something a 90-year-old could probably do. And it's important to recognize the significance of that. I'll leave you with that thought, but I'm going to be updating this again with more journal entries from my trip. Now that was like a whole week of London all crammed into this one episode, so that's why it's so long. But I'm in Amsterdam now. The city's coming alive. That's why I keep looking out the window. Unbelievably gorgeous people are out. I should probably go outside. And the sun's out. I can say this, Amsterdam so far, much better than London. First of all, it's in the EU. Second of all, the weather's much nicer. Third of all, the people are beautiful. If you want to be around beautiful people and potentially meet one and say hello, you should come to Amsterdam. It has got a lot of attractive people. And you should probably avoid London, although London is wonderful for the arts. So if you like to go to theater and you don't really care, maybe you already have a person that's beautiful or somebody that you like, London's a good fit. But Amsterdam, so far so good. Anyway, thank you so much, and this has been Your Seduction.